All right, we stay with this particular subject and speak to Northwest University School of Business and Governance, Professor Raymond Parsons, who joins us live now. Prof, good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for your time. I mean, listening to some of the opposition party members, they're not optimistic. Others simply saying that we do not have money. There's a problem. The minister, though, starting off by saying, and I quote, there is a new light that is shining down on our country and our economy. And of course, you look at this medium-term budget policy statement. Would you agree with him or the opposition parties?
Well, good afternoon to you. Let me say, it's not a question of optimism or of pessimism, it's realism. And we've got to understand that the Minister of Finance is once again having to walk a very fine line in order to strike the right balance. And in my view, listening to what he has said today, it seems to me that it's been very pragmatic, it's been very realistic and very credible what he has set out in his statement today. I think what's important is three new things which need to be reinforced. Firstly, it's clear from what was said today and subsequently that growth, economic growth, is the basic problem for South Africa. And all roads eventually lead through us being able to get much higher growth. Secondly, that this growth needs to be investment-led, both on the infrastructural side and also through increased participation by the private sector. That has to be done in order to eventually stabilize the unacceptably high debt to GDP ratio that we still have to grapple with. So I think as a whole, it seems to me that the GNU now has to throw its weight behind the commitments that have been made today. We also have what has been called the medium-term development plan, which is due in January. And of course, the main budget, when you see all the numbers and all the commitments which come in February. But so far, so good. I think this is the right message, and both government and the private sector have now got to build on it.
And speaking about building on it, debt is a huge issue, as you've just mentioned as well. And the minister, of course, even saying that it's quite unsustainable and that the service costs are now making up a large component of the spending and rising faster than economic growth. And he says that government is taking difficult steps to reduce the budget deficit and also restrain spending. Can this assist with ensuring that we see a debt decline in the next decade?
That's important because we still haven't got there. When we look at the debt ratios and the debt levels, it's quite clearly a problem that we are still having to wrestle with. But what has been said that, yes, there are obviously disciplinary steps on the fiscal side that still have to be taken. There's a concern. I think it was mentioned in the speech that in fact the risks to the outlook of the budget are still elevated. There's the problem of the public sector wage bill, which still has been unresolved. So those are still important issues on the spending side. But I think it's also been now fundamentally recognized that our growth rate is inadequate to support even the good spending, the productive spending that we want to do. That will create the jobs we want to see. We want job-rich economic growth. Quite clearly, as I said earlier, and just to resonate, the emphasis which the minister put in his statement today, if we don't get growth going, if we don't get investment going, if we don't get infrastructure off the ground and use the private sector fully in order to make that happen, we are going to be having the same conversation in a couple of years' time. So the important message that comes through today is we've got to do it differently and better so that we can have a much bigger, stronger and better economy over the next 2 or 3 years.
Prof, speaking about the same conversation, the public sector wage bill is something that we've been hearing about for a long time now, and it does not seem like we are getting ahead of this issue, particularly when you look at the fact that you have unions on the one hand who have a very different view, and then you have Treasury that has a very different view. So what will it take for it to really be an issue that they deal with once and for all and they find common ground?
Well, I think it is important because it's such a big number in the budget. It's not a question that the public sector don't get wage increases. It's a question of how does it fit into the overall fiscal framework and what are the productivity gains that you can get in the public sector. These are important fundamental questions. And quite clearly, until that is properly managed and that a decision is reached, that is one of the risks to the fiscal outlook that we are facing at the moment. So that was made very clear by the minister when he said, we've got to shift steadily from consumption spending to investment spending. That means there are some trade-offs, and obviously one of the biggest ones is going to be the final decision about the wage bill of the public sector.
Now, of course, the investment in infrastructure is quite key, and it's one of the pillars there that he was talking about. But he says that government is amending the PPP regulations to simplify the requirements for, undertaking these particular projects. How much of that will help in order to also unlock some of the bottlenecks that we've seen?
Of course it will help. I think the important point is to expedite the participation of the private sector, to not have red tape but smart tape, as one likes to put it, so that you can get the projects off the ground far quicker, that you can begin to show that you are getting effective delivery to the extent that infrastructure is fundamental to that, and that you are saying to the private sector, we're going to make it a lot easier for you to be able to participate. You have got the money, the government doesn't. We'd like to mobilize that investment now and have it underpin the growth prospects that the ministers outlined and said, of course, 1% is not good enough this year. The average of 1.8% growth over the next 2 or 3 years is also not good enough. And so the important thing about the package today is to implement it in such a way that we can improve on those growth prospects and above all, turn the current better business confidence into longer-term investor confidence. And that's really the basic thrust of what was said today by the Minister of Finance.
Yeah, and as you say, Prof, move from consumption spending to investment spending. But thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it and your insights this afternoon. That was the Northwest University School of Business and Governance Professor Raymond Parsons.